Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Doug Buchanan, Editor-in-Chief of Columbus Business First. I'm also proud to serve on the CMC Board of Trustees and Chair of its Programming Committee. We'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, the Columbus Foundation, and our forum sponsor, the Hodge Group, and our partner, AFP Central Ohio. We're also grateful to the presenting sponsor of our live stream, the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation, and our live stream partner, the Columbus Dispatch. And thank you to the Ellis for hosting us once again. Every CMC forum takes a village, so let's thank everyone supporting today's program. So the state of charitable giving has a profound impact on hundreds of organizations throughout Central Ohio, ranging from the mighty arts, healthcare, and higher education institutions to civic clubs. Trends in giving affect all of them, including your very own Columbus Metropolitan Club. Today's forum follows the release of Giving USA's annual report as we unpack the state of charitable giving with a distinguished panel. To introduce our speakers, please welcome Dan Sharpe, Vice President for Community Research and Grants Management with today's sponsor, the Columbus Foundation. Dan, the podium is yours.
Doug, thank you very much for your board service to CMC and for all that you and the staff at Business First do daily to bring important content to our region. So on behalf of the Columbus Foundation, I am pleased to introduce today's conversation, mainly for two reasons of relevance, historic as well as timely. For more than a decade, the Columbus Foundation has partnered to bring the Giving USA research to Central Ohio, to CEOs, to donors, and to nonprofits, and we are pleased to do so again today in partnership with the CMC. And the second point of relevance really is the timeliness of the data. Having just been released yesterday, we in this room and those on the live stream get the benefit of being part of one of the first public conversations and hearing directly from the source. So as fundraisers, funders, donors, and nonprofit leaders, we have been on a roller coaster the last couple of years. And we might have our gut feelings and lived experience on what is occurring with donations and all of the competing factors, shifts in corporate priorities and the dollars that follow, challenges with governmental funding of nonprofits, and many nonprofits being locked out for political reasons or being deemed not investment grade by elected officials. Individual donors are changing their giving patterns, perhaps citing inflationary causes and concerns, fear of recession. They're impacted by generational wealth transfers or even changes in personal geography through retirement and relocation. And we heard 2 weeks ago from our nonprofit colleagues at the CMC Annual State of Nonprofits about how challenging it is out there and how difficult it is to meet the urgency of all of the growing needs in our community as our community too grows. So today we get to take our gut feelings and lived experiences. We might find those to be validated or even refuted, but the best part about today's conversation is it's going to be rooted in data. And so with that, it is my great honor to introduce our panel today. We have Rachel Lustig, President and CEO of Lutheran Social Services. Erika Gable, in her capacity as President of the Central Ohio chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. And Dr. Una Osili, the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. And our host today, Laura MacDonald, Principal and Founder of Benefactor Group. And before we, yes, applause for you as well. Yeah, right. I don't want to slight you there. I'm just excited to dive into the data, and before the panel, we are going to give the podium to Dr. Osili to set the stage with some context and some opening remarks. So Dr. Osili, the podium is yours. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Columbus. Give yourselves a round of applause. Yay. I am excited, delighted, and honored to be here because I was supposed to be here in 2020. In fact, I think we had a date, we had our travel plans set, and of course, COVID took place. And so I'm delighted to return and see all the excitement, the brilliance in the room. And as I chatted with our participants, all I sensed was just energy, innovation, resilience, so much taking place here in Columbus. So give yourselves a round of applause. Special thanks to the Columbus Foundation for hosting us. Dan Sharpe in particular has just been such, I think, a passionate leader and a champion of all things Columbus and the nonprofit and philanthropic sector. And of course, Laura MacDonald, who's a longtime colleague and partner and leader. As I came here today, I drove from Indianapolis this morning. I had a chance to see a lot of what's happening in Columbus, all the buildings that are being renovated, the industrial warehouses such as this one that have been converted, and also walking. I parked at the church building and walked to this building. I got just a glimpse of the past, but also the future. And this is a great place to ground our conversation today and the panel discussion. Every year, our team launches Giving USA in June. It's a year-round project, but around this time, we get to share this data with the whole world. And I am so excited to say that you are among the first anywhere in the world to have this conversation in a live format. And it's also a time when, as we noted, there's so much going on around the world. Let me just list some of the things. There's COVID, of course, people still discussing the post-COVID economy and what it means. We have climate, the climate crisis. If you just pick up the newspaper, you hear a lot about challenges around the globe. And we have ongoing concerns about inflation and, of course, the economy. But here is the great news that I stopped by here in Columbus to share with you. That is that American generosity, even in these times of challenge and crisis, has actually emerged as resilient, innovative, and able to meet the needs in communities around the country. During COVID, we were not sure what would happen. In fact, as someone who studies data, there were a lot of predictions. What we actually saw, now that we can look back, is that Americans stepped up in their generosity. People of all different backgrounds gave. They gave through traditional means, but they also gave through non-traditional means. People tipped their service providers. They gave in new ways. They sewed masks. They gave rides to their neighbors. Some of you participated in that. And now as we look back, we now see that 2021, the year right after the pandemic, right after the recession, was the highest year on record. Today, looking in front of you, you all have the handouts. The top line number for giving is $557 billion. This makes the giving economy the largest in the world here in the United States. There's no other country that has the size, the complexity, and the range that the philanthropic sector has. In addition to that top line number, what we also know as we drill down is that giving grew, but it did not keep pace with inflation. So let me take you behind the scenes and explain why we're seeing the numbers that we're seeing and what it means for all of you. So why did giving grow, even with all the challenges that I've described? The first is the economy. The economy is the place to start. In 2023, the economy performed much better than anyone predicted. I'm an economist by training, and you may remember at the beginning of the year, pretty much everyone said there was going to be a recession. How many of you heard that? Okay, so guess what? So far, the US economy has averted a recession. We have reached what some are calling perhaps a soft landing, fingers crossed. So why am I sharing that with all of you? I'm sharing that because there is good news. As we've looked even ahead into 2024, not only is the labor market performing well, but financial markets also grew by double digits in 2023, and that trend has continued in 2024. In addition to the labor market and the overall economy, when we drill down into the housing market, that has also proved strong, especially here in Columbus and also in the Midwest. So when you take it all together, this is a wonderful and fantastic time to be in philanthropy. because the overall economy is performing much better than expected, and people give when they feel financially and economically secure. So that's the great news. There is a but, however, and let me just mention that inflation continues to be stubbornly high. Although it's moderated from the highs of the great pandemic a few years back, it's still higher than we remember from the pre-COVID era. When you put it all together, it means that all of us in this room have an unprecedented opportunity where a strong financial market, a strong labor market gives all of us a chance to work with our donors, connect with our donors, and actually move the needle on our mission and our vision for the future. So that's the good news. Now let me present the opportunities ahead that all of us can work on. Let me start with one data point that we've been tracking for quite some time now. When we look at giving, it has grown over the past few decades. I've mentioned all the growth that has taken place in the economy and also in the philanthropic sector. However, when we look at giving as a share of GDP, it is, let me just take a show of hands, how many know that number? What would you guess? Is yes. 2%, okay, very good, right on the first try. Okay, anybody else want to take a guess? Okay, so that number, that 2%, it has stayed at 2% almost in the past 3 decades. It has moved up. During COVID, it went up to 2.3%, but it's come back down to 2%. So the challenge for all of us, everybody in the room is taking on a challenge today. What would we have to do as a philanthropic sector, as a community, to move the needle beyond 2%? I'll tell you what we've done in our household. I'll share, we've made it personal. We've said to our kids, we're going to forego birthday gifts for your birthdays, and instead pick a charitable cause that everybody can give to. Now, how popular do you think we were as parents when we suggested that? Yes, our kids at the time were quite young. Now they're 24 and 15. And they have really leaned into this idea, and we as parents have adopted that. So you pick a charity, everybody contributes. And what I will share is that it has been contagious. So it's not just that they're doing it, we now see their friends doing it. On their birthday invitations, they say, here's a cause that you can support. All of us can do something to actually increase the size, the composition, and the strength and vitality of the philanthropic sector. There's another top-line number that we watch, and that's corporate giving as a share of GDP. That has actually gone down over time. In the 1970s, it was over 2%. 3% of corporate pre-tax profits went to philanthropic causes. Today, that number is down to, let's see, any show of hands here? Okay. Anybody want to take a guess? 1.2. Okay, that's pretty close. Anybody else? Any other guesses? Maybe in the back. Yes. 1.5. One more guess. Maybe over here. 5%. Okay, it was under 1%. It bumped up slightly in this year's report, but we also have another opportunity to engage the corporations that we buy from, we purchase from, we work with, to actually increase their commitment to the philanthropic sector. One of our students at the Lilly Family School has taken this on as a challenge. She's developing an app that will allow you to see what your favorite companies are giving to charitable causes, how much they're spending through their foundations, through their corporate sponsorship buckets and marketing. It's still in the works, but when it's available, I'll definitely share it with this community. Let me just end by where I started. I walked here today, walked past the Italian village, and saw the story of Columbus and American immigrants that arrived here from all different places in the world. My family, my father's Nigerian, my mother is American. I was born in New York City, so very much an American family with many different stories. But there was one thing that united my parents. Both of them are committed to generosity and philanthropy. My dad, from Nigeria, he grew up where it wasn't just about taking care of his family, it was taking care of his whole community. He was the first person to get a formal education, not to go to college, but to go to school, period, in his family. But he made sure not only that he got an education, but that everybody else, all his nieces and nephews, got a college education. My mother introduced us to volunteering at very young ages. So we volunteered. There was a senior citizens home near our home where we brought our dance troupe. I'm not going to do that today, don't worry. No dancing today. But it was exposure at an early age. And when we look at the data, what unites Americans, we don't talk about that as much, but whether, it doesn't matter, race, ethnicity, religious orientation, where people are from, Americans are generous. We see it in the data year after year. In this time of challenge and conflict and polarization, one thing that continues to unite all of us is our commitment to make the world a better place, to be generous to our communities, and to be generous in the values and the causes that we care about. So as we think about this conversation today, I want you to be, one, hopeful, two, optimistic, but also remember that during this time of adversity, philanthropy has proved resilient, it's built an innovation muscle, and it is poised to be part of solving problems. So I urge you to roll up your sleeves today, excited about the data. We have an unexpectedly good year in the face of all these challenges. The economy is performing much better than anyone expected at this point. And we have a philanthropic sector with so many deeply committed individuals, both on the donor side and on the nonprofit side. And all of you in this room are evidence of that. So I encourage you to take this message to your workplaces, to your families. You saw that we have made it personal. Find ways to make this data personal. And let's make Columbus certainly one of the most innovative cities in the country. Let's also put the Columbus map, a stake in the ground around philanthropy in the future. So I'll stop here and turn it back over to our moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Una. Yes, I had the pleasure of being a traveling companion with Dr. Osili when I had the privilege of chairing the Giving USA Foundation board and getting a front row seat to see how hard she and her colleagues worked to pull this all together. So delighted to have her here with us today to share, and with our colleagues here in town as well. And I'll start with a data-driven question. So we heard $557 billion given to nonprofit organizations in 2023. These competing factors, it grew in current dollars, declined when adjusted for inflation. We thought there was going to be a recession. Maybe people were cautious, but then the markets were great. I'm curious, Rachel, Erika, what was your experience either in your organization, and Erika, I know you're here with AFP, but you also have a front row seat to the giving at CCAD, or what you heard from your colleagues as you talked to them in AFP?
Okay, I think this works. Okay, good to see all of you friends. Thanks for coming today. I think, so personally at CCAD, which is the Columbus College of Art and Design, if you haven't heard yet, we actually saw a really interesting uptick in giving to our very largest donors, and then to sort of our annual giving, sort of our smaller level donors. So there was sort of a gap in the middle. So we actually, for major gifts at CCAD, it's $25,000 and above. We're also in the middle of a comprehensive campaign, and so we saw some big gifts come in pretty early on, which was really exciting. A lot of those were through like stock transfers or plan giving or things that sort of weren't cash, right? And so I think that's something that as fundraisers, we need to educate our donors on, you can in fact not just write us a check, which is lovely, but so I think there was sort of an increase in big donations and an increase in small donations. We saw a gap in the middle.
And I'm Rachel Lustig with Lutheran Social Services of Central Ohio. And just to give a very quick overview of our organization, we're one of Central Ohio's largest health and human service organizations in our community. We provide services in 3 areas: housing, healthcare, and emergency assistance. Of our $75 million budget, about $9 million comes from contributions and philanthropy, so a rather large percentage of our overall budget. It is, that stayed steady relatively over the course of the last year, so we didn't see a major increase or decrease. I think for us, it's hard to take our eye off the fact that that has changed substantially in the last 3 years. So we saw a high watermark during COVID in fiscal year 2020, and we are about 20% larger, or 20% smaller now than we were then. So there's a little bit of change, and I think that what we are seeing mirrors what Erika talked about, and the trends are that there are fewer people giving, but we are seeing people who are at the higher end giving larger amounts.
Are either of your organizations, or Una, are you aware of any national initiatives that try to address the missing middle or the declining donor counts?
I will say, oh, go ahead.
I think we're having to really evaluate our strategy overall. So Lutheran Social Services is both a faith-based and human service organization, kind of straddles two of the major kind of charitable groups. And I think we benefit from that in many ways with a rather large number of donors who give very generously. And I think we have relied upon several tens of thousands of people making small gifts to us over time. But what we're seeing is that those gifts which we traditionally would get through mail appeals are no longer working for us in the way that they were previously. And we're starting to see those much larger donations and bequests be the ones that we're going to have to depend on. Well, it's a very different infrastructure and strategy that you build to be able to capture those larger gifts. Or the second trend would be, as our population ages and our donor base ages, how do we stay relevant and connected to the younger donors who are contributing in very different ways? So it's requiring the philanthropic arm at Lutheran Social Services to really have to be innovative and responsive as well.
So I'll ask for a show of hands. Anybody who's younger than a baby boomer, do you have both a check and a stamp at home? Oh, okay, more than I expected. Una, you were going to add to it.
Yes, so we didn't get a chance to talk about this within the data, but when we look at that 557 billion, you could say that 20% of it comes from foundations, 1 out of every 5 charitable dollars. About 8% comes from charitable bequests. People who are no longer with us, but the bulk of giving comes from individuals. Now it's about 67% roughly over the last few years, but in the past that was about 85% of all giving. When we drill down into the individual segment, what I think all of us should be very conscious of is that traditionally nonprofits have relied on donors of all different backgrounds and ages. But as we look at databases that many nonprofits hold, the central challenge is that their donor bases tend to be older. It's called the graying of the donor base. And many nonprofits are finding that they are having challenges in bringing younger donors into the pipeline. This is also consistent with our data from the Philanthropy panel study. Some of you know about this. We've been tracking the same American families over time. And when we look at who's still giving and who's giving large dollar amounts, it tends to be older donors. When we look at donor retention, year after year giving, it tends to be older donors. So the question for all of us is, how do we engage the next generation of donors? At the Lilly Family School, we've worked very hard on this question, really thinking about how do we bring that next generation. The phrase that I use often is we need to meet those donors where they are. Find out what is important to them, how they want to be engaged. Organizations are having a lot of success when they start to rethink how they engage donors. One panel I was on yesterday talked about a gaming initiative that is raising tens of millions of dollars by having younger donors watch video games, people playing video games, and make donations. That's a completely new way of thinking. We partnered with another organization, the CDC Foundation. It's been in existence since 1991. During COVID, they launched their first ever crowdfunding campaign. They partnered with, guess who? TikTok. TikTok has a donation sticker. As you create your videos, you can donate to an organization. In 1 month, in March 2020, they raised $40 million. We asked them, what led you to partner with TikTok? Something you had never done before. I'm not suggesting that you partner with TikTok. I'm just giving this as an example. They said we had never done it before, but we realized that we had to try something new. And I think I want to encourage all of us as we think about how to meet those donors where they are, and whether at the national or local level, spending time with our donors, understanding what's important to them. And I'll just share one last story from our United Way CEO. She wanted to have an event for younger donors. She suggested a dinner, a banquet with plaques for all the young donors. And they said, we don't want plaques, and we don't want a dinner. and we don't want a banquet. And she was so taken aback. Her whole team was very surprised. What? No dinner? No plaques? What do we do instead? So she said, let's just ask them what they want, which was a novel thing for them. And they said, let's go bowling, a bowling outing. She thought, bowling? Is that what you want to do? But guess what? They went bowling. It was a lot of fun. She said it was less expensive than a dinner and a banquet, and everyone had a wonderful time. So the story there is understanding those donors, finding out what's important to them, and meeting them where they are.
Great. I'll say there's also an initiative called the Generosity Commission. You'll be hearing more about that in the national news, we hope, in the fall, that is trying to broaden these notions of generosity and encourage more people. One of their studies showed that somebody who volunteers is 9% more likely to give to the organization the next year. And so if we're talking about broadening notions of generosity, time, talent, treasure, testimony, and ties, as, for many, a door into the charitable giving experience, I'm going to throw a curveball. I didn't prep you guys for this, but can you give me some examples of ways in which you might engage some of your constituents, or Erika, that you've heard from AFP colleagues, are engaging people with those other 4 T's, in part to get to the 5th one of treasure?
Yes. So what's really interesting to me about philanthropy is that philanthropy means love of humanity. And so it's a way that we come together, and we are all here because we want to be together, right? And so philanthropy is part of that. So at CCAD, I'll give an example. Historically, we've had pretty low alumni giving. And so a year ago, we started an alumni advisory board that was a volunteer board from alumni from across the world, from all different majors and ages. And we engaged them over the last year in some fun projects that were sort of serious to them, right? And then just recently, last month, I think it was, we launched our first ever alumni crowdfunding campaign, and with the goal of engaging more alumni in philanthropic giving. And so the idea was, yes, we want to raise money, but we also wanted to make sure that more alumni were giving, and I think it was pretty successful. So.
When I think about your question, I'm also struck by kind of a sentiment that I've seen through Dr. Osili's presentation, and I got the opportunity to sit with her, and we were just conversing back and forth, and the optimism that you were sharing was so genuine on the podium as it was at the table. I felt like the little black rain cloud. You would make a comment, and then I would be like, yeah, but this. But I think that optimism and enthusiasm is something that we've got to share with people in our community. So let me just provide a very real example of what philanthropy makes possible in our community. So I mentioned that Lutheran Social Services receives about $7 or $9 million a year in philanthropic donations. Well, and I also said we have housing and health care and emergency assistance. Well, in that housing arena, we run 5 of our community's emergency shelters, including Choices for Domestic Violence, Faith Mission, which is our legacy shelter here in town. Between those 2 organizations, $5 million goes to support operations to make those 2 function in our community. They make it possible for 500 people a night to have a place to go, some of them who are fleeing for their life. So you asked the question about how do we invite people in through an opportunity to volunteer. The other place that receives significant charitable donations at Lutheran Social Services is our food pantry. So where are our donors engaged? In our food pantry, in our emergency shelters. They're the ones that are connecting over that course of the meal, and they're able to kind of see it. I think that there's something about food that helps to make things real for people, and there is a strong connection, and it's not because my team isn't also very intentional about inviting them from the volunteer experience into that philanthropic transformative experience as well. But I think it has to do with inspiring that optimism about what they have the capacity to change in our community.
That's wonderful, and I'm happy to hear it as well, because I feared, and in fact it happened, that the headlines this year is that giving declined for the 2nd straight year. Because giving was down in '22 after 2 years of historic growth. And it's up in current dollars, but down adjusted for inflation this year. But over 4 years, it's increased 28%, which is enormous. I think we'd all be happy if that was our experience in something like our stock portfolios. Absolutely. And it does speak, though, to the influence of high net worth donors. And what we're seeing is that many of them are baby boomers or older, so born sometime before 1964. And the prognosticators say that they will pass on $84 trillion, of which $72 trillion will go to their heirs, and $12 trillion will go to the nonprofit sector. So I'll just ask, are any of our panelists yet experiencing an actual torrent of bequests from some of those donors?
We would love to be experiencing a torrent of bequests. Are we seeing an increase? Yes, I think that we are. I think two things, because you look at the major gift first. For us, $5,000 gift classifies an individual as a major giver. And that represents, of our total, only 1% of our total contribution of people, which, by the way, first off, is pretty incredible, that 99% of people are contributing below that level, which illustrates that many hands make light the work. But that 1% is giving almost 33% of the total. So that's the leading indicator. So the lag indicator is we've started to position for that wealth transfer. And we have seen over the course of the last few years, 100% increase in people making contributions to bequests. So it's essential. I mean, we hear it. What I worry about is how do we make sure that our health and human service organizations are positioned to be able to respond and take advantage of what we know is happening.
Well, I think also with thinking about like the AFP in general, I guess across all different organizations, earlier we talked a little bit about how we segment donors and meet them where they are. We just need to get a lot better at that. Gone are the days of the 10,000, form letters mailing out, and with hopes that we get, a check in the mail. So I think it takes a lot more strategy and planning up front to think through who do we want to talk to about what, but I think it really pays off. And also, we just need to get better at talking about what is a bequest, what is a planned gift. We are all going to die, and what does that look like after we're dead? And that sounds harsh, maybe, but it's something, I talked to my 7-year-old about. I was like, well, we're going to die someday. What do we want to do? So it's sort of, we just need to get real about it, right? So we can talk about it more and be more transparent about it.
I think here the data is actually a good, when you're trying to have that tough conversation, the data is a great place to start. What we see in this year's Giving USA report is that the bequest segment is now about 10% of all giving, and it's projected to grow. So one way to think about it is an annual gift, but what about a legacy gift? Many people in the baby boom generation are reaching what we call their peak giving years. We've also seen that assets for Americans 55 and older, that's baby boomer and younger, have grown by 30%. These are households that have accumulated savings, and let me just share this, they are very interested in legacy. Many of them are starting to think about, what is my legacy? What is that going to be? So if you're looking for language around how do you have that conversation, I'm sure you have lots of colleagues here in Columbus. We have the fundraising school. But I am also encouraged by the data, the national data, that show that even younger people, under 55, I have colleagues who in their 30s are thinking about their legacy. They're starting early. COVID, that's maybe the silver lining. We're all much more aware of what economists call mortality risk. And not just right now, but in the future, and planning for that future. There's so many ways to do this, and we find that organizations that start to build that capacity, even if it's just a staff person, a portion of a staff person, are in a position to really benefit. One organization I'm on the board of, was on the board of a few years ago, received 2 unsolicited bequests, $500,000 each. It's a smaller organization. We were actually amazed because we did not know these donors. They had moved away. They lived on the East Coast. And we thought, wow, these are donors we didn't even know had made this commitment to our organization. We may have even realized larger bequests if we had been more intentional. So even if you haven't started, I encourage you, this is the best time. There's never been a better time. We have a very large segment of our population that's reaching that legacy era and is thinking about this. You have an opportunity to partner with them to actualize their own vision. And don't think of it as a difficult conversation. This may be one that they're very willing to have. So I say, this is your moment, definitely.
And if you need resources, there's an organization called Leave a Legacy that happened to be born right here in Columbus, Ohio, at the kitchen table of Diana Newman when she was a vice president at the Columbus Foundation, and Steve Risch when he was the vice president of the Nationwide Foundation. She tells stories about the kids running around beneath the table as they cooked up this scheme. And there are free resources available to any nonprofit organization that are now housed at the website of the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners. But born right here in Columbus, Ohio, it's gone global. And they have no pride of authorship, so they don't often get associated with it, but they were the folks who started it. And I think that if every organization received an equal share of that $12 trillion, it would be $8 million each, but that's not what's going to happen. So there are any things that you're doing or that you see AFP initiatives to encourage donors to be proactive about encouraging donors to support a particular cause or organization?
Ooh, that's a great question. So our local chapter of the Association of Fundraising Professionals has about 350 members, which is really exciting. And we have active education sessions, which I know many of you have spoken at. So I think part of it is just getting used to talking about things like this. But I think also part of it is being intentional about the language that we use, being intentional that this is a giving vehicle. And I think one strategy, I guess, that's a part of the bigger picture is talking with wealth advisors. I mean, most of the time, as you know, when you're dealing with your own personal finances, you talk to your wealth advisor. And a lot of times we're realizing that people, future and current donors, ask their wealth advisor, who should I be giving to? And if they don't know our organization, they're going to say, well, I don't know. And so we've started a different strategy, both at our organization and other organizations, to really sort of engage that sector, which has been met with a lot of success. And a lot of wealth advisors are eager for the knowledge about your nonprofits. So I don't want to keep that as a secret, but that's been an interesting a tactic, I think.
I know that we're talking a lot about the economy, and we've mentioned, some really positive trends which absolutely exist. But we've been honest about inflationary pressures. I think we would be remiss if we didn't acknowledge that wealth is not being experienced by everyone in our community, and that there are many who are really suffering in our midst, and for whom the last couple of years things have gotten substantially worse for them. If we think about the impact of the cost of housing and the child care infrastructure, and so we could mention some very real and tangible things. And so I think one of the realities is that sometimes there's just power in the truth. And that when you invite somebody into something that they already know to be true, like there are people who are hurting and together we can do more for them. That people see that and they know that and they want to be a part of it. And I think that's honestly, there are a couple of things that I'm pretty worried about. We have some, for ourselves, we're relying on some pandemic-related funds to support operations of essential services in our community. And, I look at what's going to happen when that dries up, and I heard Dr. Osili's optimism about how philanthropy stepped up. And I think that we're going to have to call on everybody to step up again, to be there for the people for whom these last couple of years have just been really hard. And I hope that the truth will resonate with people in that.
Well said. As Doug gets ready to open up the microphone to folks online and/or in the room, I'll just ask you all to answer one last question, because that stepping up means that they have a high level of trust. People give to organizations that they trust. The new trust barometer came out this week as well. Nonprofits continue to be at the top of the list of institutions that are trusted in America. So what should the sector do? What can we all do to maintain that level of trust, to equip our fundraisers to maintain that level of trust? What's our call to action there?
Oh my goodness, just spend a minute watching people on the front lines doing their work. I mean, if you are looking for heroism in our community, like, you don't have to go very far. And I think what they have been asked to bear in these last couple of years has just been a weight that has been disproportionate. So if you are looking to be inspired, and if you're looking to say, well, you know, it's easy to poke a hole, but if you're looking for consistency and people who are trying, I think you don't have to go very far than to look at the helpers in our community.
I would say also that, I mean, as fundraisers, our job is to be, you know, truthful and honest and transparent, and to be effective facilitators between the donor or potential donor and the organization. And I always say that, you know, giving should be joyful. It should be a fun process throughout the whole thing. And if we're doing our jobs right, then it is. So it's not just supporting the mission of the organization, which is critical, but it's also making sure that that donor is in a process of enjoyment in their philanthropy.
Love that. I think that joy of giving is paramount. I also want us to remember the last few years, certainly the challenges that all of us have been through, but also the resilience, the adaptation, the fact that many organizations have had to innovate, invent new ways of working. So take stock of that, and I think that should be our call to action, to lean into that innovation, that resilience and adaptability. And also remember that at this time when people are looking for places to trust, we can be that place. We can bring that hope, that optimism, and the belief that things can be better. Many organizations have shown that transparency, accountability, but also modeling that hope, showing how things can be improved. I think that's what the nonprofit sector does best during the pandemic and beyond. So that would be my call to action.
Good. Doug, questions?
Laura, thank you very much, and thank you to today's panelists. If you're in the room with us today and you have a question for our panelists, please do join us here at the microphone. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. If you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. Great questions at CMC have two things in common, right? They take less than 30 seconds to ask, and they end with a what? A question mark. Thank you. I love our repeat attendees. I'll launch us off with this one. What advice would you have for small volunteer-run nonprofits seeking to raise funds for programs or special outreach events? Do you feel that hiring a part-time fundraiser, someone who may take a commission of the funds raised, is an option or a good option?
It's a violation of the Code of Ethics of the Association of Fundraising Professionals to take any kind of a commission. So, no commissions. But beyond that, Erika or Rachel, what would you say?
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, I guess part of it is just figuring out what are the strengths of your volunteers and how can they bring that to the table. And you know, through AFP, we have a lot of templates and examples and things like that. So it's, you know, don't reinvent the wheel. Start with what we have. Talk to your colleagues. See what's working there. But there's a lot of good places to start. I see our friends at the Columbus Foundation have lots of resources, and they're always really good advisors. And so I guess it's, you know, figuring out what are you raising money for. I mean, I think a lot of times we think of, well, we just need more. It's like, well, for what purpose, right? What are we doing with it? What, you know, do we really need that? And so I think it's trying to clarify internally what is that clarity of purpose, and then reaching out to your colleagues and friends for help. Don't take commissions.
Yeah, and if all of your board members aren't making some sort of a contribution to the organization, don't bother asking others.
My name is Brian Urbanski with the Aubrey Affordable Housing Foundation, and we are very proud, Rachel, to be supporting your organization by providing housing for a number of your clients. And the question I have today, because we support a lot of vulnerable populations, reentry, and other groups, and the question I have is, we've talked a lot about the financial aspects of the charitable giving. I'm curious how, in a post-pandemic world, what kind of levels are you seeing in volunteerism, and has volunteerism increased or decreased now that we're hopefully past the COVID-19 era?
I can jump in here and say that the trends with volunteerism are a bit discouraging in the sense that they haven't quite returned to where they were pre-pandemic. We have seen some return, especially among maybe younger folks, but not quite back to the pre-pandemic levels. But having said that, I think volunteering, we see a very strong correlation between volunteering and giving, meaning people who volunteer tend to also be very high givers. And volunteering is a wonderful way to introduce people to a mission. So we've talked about giving a lot, but what we're also finding is it's not just the 3 T's, time, talent, and treasure, but also testimony. How is your donor base or your community engaged in telling your story? So that testimony on social media, everyone has a following, or maybe 1 follower, maybe 1 million followers, but activate your whole network if you're trying to also build the volunteerism.
And I would say that our local experience mirrors what Dr. Osili says with our slots for helping out at the food pantries, serving meals. We have gotten up to about 75% of where we were in a pre-pandemic era. So if you are in a place where you're looking for a volunteer opportunity, or you work at a corporation that engages in that, we'd love to see people join us. But what I also really loved about your question is, I think what, this was the conversation that we were having at the table before, was about the fact that philanthropy and volunteerism can be an opportunity for us to engage in our social, political world in a way that's slightly different. And so if we can facilitate that democratic process for people who are otherwise ostracized, like the population that you're talking about, by giving them opportunities to contribute through volunteerism, I think our whole community will not just be stronger, but will be more authentically democratic. And I think it's really important.
Carol Looper, watching with the online audience, asks, how do you recommend people on a fixed income choose what charitable gifts to make? There are so many great choices.
Very easy. Lutheran Social Services. I mean, food, shelter, clothing, hope. Sorry, that was flippant.
Cannot argue with that. Very compelling. I would also say we have a process actually at the school called the Philanthropic Autobiography. I don't know how many of you have heard of this, where you can start to actually interrogate your own values, your life story, and learn what causes are really important to you and your children, and perhaps come up with a giving plan. I'd say to everybody here, just like we have planning around retirement, around our kids' college education, we should all be intentional about our giving, not just people on a fixed income, but at every stage of your life. Make sure that you're aligning your giving with your values and where you really have a strong desire to make a difference.
And I'll just add that if you choose an organization to support, however many zeros might be on the check, stick with them. One of the most expensive things an organization has to do is acquire new donors. So unless they've really stubbed their toe in some way, give to them this year and next year. Give them a few years to really get to know you and be part of their donor retention. It will make them more resilient.
I would also add in that a lot of organizations forget that we can do lots of pledges over a long period of time, or maybe not long, 5 years, let's say. And so I think a lot of times when I'm personally talking with donors and they say, well, I can only give $100 this year. In my brain, I think that's $500, because if we do our jobs right, we can make sure that they commit to us for those periods of time, and as a nonprofit person, get them to document that, and so then you can have that, not just sort of in your books, but then also that, longevity with that donor and the long-term relationship it builds.
We have about 7 minutes left. We'll try to get to at least 3 more questions.
Hello, my name is Jody Engel. My question is, can you talk about any models nationally that have done an outstanding job with collective impact initiatives, especially when it focuses on a specific area of a community, and really trying to engage individual donors? Thank you.
I would say if you're looking for examples, one that I cite often is the 1 Acre Fund. How many of you have heard of it? It's an international organization, but go to their website. What I love is that they do 2 things really well. They collect a lot of data about who they're serving and who's benefiting, and they have amazing stories. So that combination. Another group I would highlight that does 1 Acre. Yes, 1 spelled O-N-E and then acre. And then here in the United States, I would also lift up the Salvation Army. People don't know this about the Salvation Army. It has a footprint in every zip code in the country. They collect amazing data going back to the 1800s. They can tell you how many meals were served, how many children were served, how many prayers were given. But they also have amazing stories about the lives they have changed. And what I would say is they go back to this, they serve people that no one else will. And if you put the themes I'm bringing up, data as well as the storytelling, those are very compelling around collective impact. Even if you haven't collected any data in the past, you can start to do that going forward. And data is not just the metrics, the numbers, but also the stories. Having both of those is, I think, the combination we're looking for.
Hi, I'm Donovan Jones with the Columbus Gay Men's Chorus. Thank you all for being here. My question has to do, and pardon the question being a little vague because I'm still wrapping my head around this. You mentioned stuff about individual giving, the idea of increased tips or GoFundMe pages or things like that. And as somebody working in a nonprofit, I'm still wrapping my head around what to do with those trends, which seem to be growing, right? And just anything that you can say about how we need to think about that as nonprofits.
It's a great question. I would say what that tells us is individuals are still the largest segment of giving. So as a nonprofit, what we have to look at is how are those individuals giving? What's important to them? What underlies all those trends, GoFundMe, the tips, is the ease and convenience. People talk about the frictionless experience of giving. And when we think about traditional ways of giving, they're laden with barriers. You have to fill in all these forms and so forth. It might take you 10 minutes to make a gift. I think what we have to learn is how can we make it easier, reduce the barriers, bring more people to the giving experience, introduce more people to the joy of giving, and also think about one example I hear a lot of nonprofits say is, well, donors want to give on Venmo. We don't have a Venmo option. Or they want to give via Cash App. We don't have a Cash App. I'm not suggesting you have every single platform, but increasingly understand who your potential donors are, how they're giving, and how to engage them. It may be through a crowdfunding campaign. It may be through a new vehicle. Understand that the ways of giving are changing. There's ChatGPT, AI, all of these new things, and we have to adapt to those new ways. I think the nonprofit sector has shown tremendous ability to innovate, but we're going to have to keep doing that. I know that sounds exhausting in this era, but it's also exciting because there are so many new opportunities out there.
What also strikes me about that trend is we find ourselves at a time where the infrastructures of community are breaking down. And many of those examples that you shared are also about a personal interaction and an opportunity to have a meaningful impact on somebody in front of you. And I think that that's such an important part of what philanthropy has been about, because it starts in the home, it starts with our family before it even gets beyond that. So I think one of the challenges that we have in the nonprofit environment is that Columbus unfortunately finds itself as one of the most economically segregated communities. So how do we find a way to still build community, to build a sense of belonging across barriers that exist within it?
Hi, thank you for showing up, everyone, today. Christine Roberts, Mid-Ohio Food Collective. My question for the panel is, how do you anticipate political donors and donations impacting philanthropy coming out of the November election and into fiscal year, or calendar year 25? And do you have specific strategies for converting political donors back into the philanthropic sector?
I can just say at a macro level, even though political giving has grown and more people are giving to political causes, political giving is still a very small slice. If you think about the $557 billion, that is, political giving is maybe less than 10% in terms of overall numbers. So you should not be overly concerned about the political donations. However, I will say that with technology, we're seeing that especially younger donors are thinking charitable gifts may not be tax advantaged for them because they're not itemizing on their charitable gifts, so why not give a political donation? It goes back to the point about impact. I think understanding those donors' motivations, what causes they care about, and showing them how, with a gift to Lutheran services, to your organizations, they can have a meaningful impact. The biggest lesson from our work on political donations is people who give politically see that as a lever to change society. I think here we have to also show them that the charitable sector is not just an option, but it is the opportunity to really make a long-term difference in an area, whether that's climate, the environment, homelessness, food insecurity, all of those. I think we have to lead with that mission and the impact they can have.
And in the past, Una, hasn't the data shown that somebody who gives to a political candidate or cause is more likely to give philanthropically and give more?
Yes, so generally we don't find that election years, presidential elections even lead to a dampening of charitable giving, and that people who are giving politically are also people who are giving charitably. That the two do not actually crowd each other out, contrary to a lot of perceptions out there. The one place I would say where we are seeing some softening of that is with a lot of younger folks, the folks that aren't itemizing anyway, who are saying, well, a political gift will make a bigger difference in climate or in an issue. So it goes back to this idea of issue-based giving, that for donors, they need to see a link between their gifts and an impact in society. And that's where I think all of us can actually do a better job.
I think impact is a great place to wrap it up. I wish we had more time, and maybe we'll just keep chatting up here. But in the meantime, I'm going to turn it over to the other Doug Buchanan with Columbus Business First for some concluding remarks. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, well, I hope everybody leaves today with a renewed sense of optimism, despite the fact they're all going to die. So I want to thank today's presenting sponsor, the Columbus Foundation, our sponsor, the Hodge Group, and our forum partner, AFP Central Ohio. Thank you to the Ellis for hosting us, and to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for supporting today's live stream. Let's have a hand for our supporters. And a very special appreciation for today's speakers, Erika Gable, Dr. Una Osili, Rachel Lustig, and our host, Laura MacDonald. Let's have another hand of applause for them. We are off next week for Independence Day, but please join us at our next forum, Zone In, the proposed zoning overhaul that will reshape Columbus. It'll be right here at the Ellis on July 10th. Thank you again, everyone. We couldn't do it without you. Have a great afternoon.